The dust kicked up around Sarah Abbott's worn boots as she stood in the shade of the mercantile, clutching the eviction notice that might as well have been her death sentence in this unforgiving desert town of Parowan, Utah. She had exactly 3 days to come up with $200 or lose the small ranch that was all she had left of her father. And in the scorching summer of 1882, that kind of money might as well have been the moon itself. The heat shimmered off the red rock cliffs surrounding the small Mormon settlement, making the air thick enough to choke on. Sarah's calico dress clung to her back, but the cold dread in her stomach had nothing to do with the weather. Her father had taken out the loan 2 years ago to buy breeding stock after a harsh winter killed half their cattle. Then he had died 6 months later when his horse spooked during a storm, leaving Sarah alone at 22 with a ranch she barely knew how to run and a debt that grew larger every month. She walked slowly toward the first bank of Parowan, her steps heavy despite her small frame. The wooden sidewalk creaked under her feet, and she could feel the eyes of townsfolk watching her. Everyone knew the Abbott ranch was failing. Everyone knew she was one strong wind away from losing everything. The pity in their eyes made her jaw clench with determination she did not quite feel. The bank stood at the corner of Main Street and Center, a 2-story brick building that seemed to lord over the smaller wooden structures surrounding it. Sarah pushed through the heavy door, and the relative coolness inside did nothing to calm the racing of her heart. Vernon Hayes sat behind his massive oak desk, his round face glistening with sweat despite the shade. He looked up as she entered, and something in his expression made her skin crawl. "Miss Abbott," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "I was expecting you might pay me a visit today." Sarah remained standing, her hands gripping her small reticule. "Mr. Hayes, I received your notice. I need more time. The cattle I have left are nearly ready for market, and if I can just get them to the rail station in Cedar City, I can pay you everything I owe." Hayes leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He was a man of perhaps 45, with thinning hair he combed carefully over his scalp, and a waistcoat that strained against his expanding middle. He had come to Parowan 5 years ago with money from back east, and had quickly established himself as the man who controlled the purse strings of half the county. "Sarah, may I call you Sarah?" He did not wait for her answer. "The problem is that more time is exactly what I cannot give you. The bank has been more than patient. Your father made promises he could not keep, and now that debt has fallen to you." "I know that," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I am not asking for charity, Mr. Hayes. I am asking for a chance to make good on what is owed." Hayes stood and walked around his desk, moving closer to her than was proper. Sarah took an involuntary step backward, but he kept coming until she could smell the bay rum on his collar and the whiskey on his breath, despite the early hour. "There might be a way," he said softly, his eyes traveling down her figure in a way that made her want to scrub herself clean. "A woman alone has certain assets that go beyond cattle and land." Sarah's blood ran cold. "I do not understand your meaning, sir." "I think you do." His hand reached out to touch a strand of her dark hair that had escaped her simple bun. "You are a beautiful woman, Sarah. Far too beautiful to be breaking your back on that failing ranch. I could forgive the entire debt. $200, gone just like that. And in return, you would simply need to be agreeable to certain arrangements." The room seemed to tilt around her. "You want me to be your mistress?" Hayes smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Such an ugly word. I prefer to think of it as a mutually beneficial relationship. You keep your ranch, I get the pleasure of your company. No one needs to know the details of our arrangement." "You are married," Sarah whispered, her voice catching with revulsion and fear. "My wife is a practical woman. She understands that men have needs." His hand moved from her hair to her shoulder, and Sarah jerked away so violently she nearly knocked over a brass spittoon. "I would rather lose everything," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I would rather sleep in the street than agree to what you are suggesting." Hayes's expression hardened, all pretense of geniality vanishing. "Then you are a fool. You have 3 days, Miss Abbott. 3 days to come up with $200 in cash, or the sheriff will remove you from that property by force. And when you are destitute and desperate, do not come crying to me. My offer has an expiration date." Sarah fled from the bank, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall until she was out of sight. She practically ran down the street, not caring who saw her distress, needing only to get away from that man and his vile proposition. She found herself behind the livery stable, pressing her back against the sun-warmed wood, and finally letting the tears come. This was how Grant Xavier found her. He had been in town less than an hour, having ridden in from a cattle drive that had taken him from Texas all the way to the Wyoming Territory, and now back down through Utah on his way home to Colorado. His horse needed reshoeing, and he needed a bath and a strong drink in that order. The sound of a woman crying had pulled him from his path like a rope around his chest. Grant was not the kind of man who could walk past someone in distress. It was both his greatest strength and his most persistent weakness, or so his trail boss had told him more than once. At 26, he had the lean, hard build of a man who lived in the saddle, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that touched his collar. His jaw was shadowed with several days' worth of stubble, and his blue shirt was covered in trail dust, but his green eyes were kind as he approached the crying woman carefully. "Madam," he said softly, not wanting to startle her, "are you hurt?" Sarah's head snapped up and she quickly wiped at her face, mortification flooding through her. "I am fine. Please just go about your business." But Grant did not move away. He had seen genuine distress before, had comforted his younger sister through plenty of tears growing up, and he recognized the particular quality of crying that came from desperation rather than simple sadness. "Begging your pardon, madam, but you do not look fine." He kept his distance, his hands visible and non-threatening. "Is there someone I can fetch for you? Family, maybe?" "I have no family," Sarah said, then immediately regretted revealing so much to a stranger. "I apologize. You must think me terribly improper, carrying on this way in public." "I think you look like someone who has had the kind of day that would break a lesser person," Grant said simply. He pulled a relatively clean handkerchief from his vest pocket and offered it to her. "My name is Grant Xavier. I am just passing through, which sometimes makes me easier to talk to than folks you see every day." Sarah took the handkerchief and pressed it to her eyes. There was something steadying about this stranger's presence, something solid and trustworthy in his quiet demeanor. Maybe it was because he was passing through, because he had no stake in the social politics of Parowan, that she found herself speaking. "I am Sarah Abbott. I own a ranch outside of town, or I did until about an hour ago. I have a debt I cannot pay, and the banker made it clear that my only option is to sell myself to him like a piece of property." Grant's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. "The banker propositioned you. He said he would forgive my debt if I became his mistress." The word tasted like ash in her mouth. $200, that is what I owe. It might as well be 2,000. Grant was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah braced herself for judgment or worse, for him to suggest she take the offer. Instead, he asked, "Is your ranch worth saving?" The question surprised her enough that she looked up at him directly for the first time. He had a good face, she thought distantly. Strong and honest, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from hard work rather than soft living. "It was my father's," she said simply. It is all I have left of him. The land is good, the water rights are solid. I just need time to build the herd back up and get through to next season." $200, Grant repeated, almost to himself. He had $340 in his saddlebags, the earnings from 6 months on the trail. He had been planning to take that money home to Colorado, to finally buy that piece of land he had been saving for since he was 18 years old. It represented years of hard work, of sleeping on the ground and eating dust, and saving every penny he could spare. But he looked at Sarah Abbott with her tear-stained face, and her stubborn pride and her desperate eyes, and he knew with absolute certainty what he was going to do. "Take me to the bank," he said. Sarah blinked. "What? Take me to the bank? I will pay your debt. You cannot be serious. You do not even know me." "I know you well enough," Grant said firmly. "I know you would rather lose everything than compromise yourself. I know that ranch means enough to you to stand up to a man who could destroy your reputation with a word. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." "I cannot accept charity from a stranger," Sarah protested, even as hope flared painfully in her chest. "I have no way to pay you back." "Then pay me back over time. We can draw up a proper contract if it makes you feel better, but right now, let's go settle this debt before that snake gets any other ideas." Grant offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Sarah took it. Vernon Hayes looked up in surprise when Sarah returned less than 30 minutes after storming out, now accompanied by a trail-worn cowboy who looked at the banker with open contempt. Grant pulled a leather pouch from his jacket and counted out $200 in gold coins and banknotes, stacking them on Hayes's desk with deliberate precision. "That settles Miss Abbott's debt in full," Grant said, his voice hard. "I want a receipt and the original loan documents." Hayes's face went through several interesting color changes as he processed this development. "And who might you be?" "I am the man who is paying the debt. That is all you need to know." Grant leaned forward, planting his hands on the desk. "Now get the papers." "This is highly irregular," Hayes blustered, but he was already opening his safe. He could not refuse payment, not without raising questions he did not want asked. He withdrew a folder and spread the documents across his desk, his fingers shaking slightly as he prepared a receipt. As Grant watched the banker work, something cold and furious settled in his chest. He saw the way Hayes glanced at Sarah, saw the possessive anger in the older man's expression, and understood exactly what kind of man he was dealing with. When Hayes slid the receipt across the desk, Grant picked it up and examined it carefully before folding it and handing it to Sarah. "There," he said, "your ranch is clear." Hayes could not contain himself any longer. "You fool," he spat at Grant. "You just spent $200 on a woman who will never be able to pay you back. That ranch is worthless, and she does not have the sense or the strength to make it profitable." "That is my concern, not yours," Grant said evenly. "She came here begging," Hayes continued, his face reddening. "She would have agreed to my terms eventually. Women like her always do when they have no other choice. You just cost yourself a fortune for nothing." Grant's fist connected with Hayes's jaw before Sarah even saw him move. The banker went sprawling backward, his chair tipping over and sending him crashing to the floor. Grant stood over him, flexing his hand, his expression calm despite the violence of his action. "That was for speaking about Miss Abbott as though she were property," Grant said quietly. "If I hear you have spread a single word against her reputation, I will come back and finish what I started. Do we understand each other?" Hayes scrabbled backward, his hand to his bleeding mouth. "You cannot just assault people. I will have the sheriff on you." "Go ahead," Grant said. "I am sure the whole town would love to hear about your arrangement with Miss Abbott. I wonder what your wife would think. I wonder what the church elders would say." Hayes paled, and Grant knew his guess had landed. He turned his back on the banker and offered his arm to Sarah again. "Shall we go?" They walked out into the brilliant afternoon sunshine, and Sarah found she was trembling. "You hit him," she said, somewhat unnecessarily. "Yes, madam, I did. I probably should not have, but I do not regret it." Grant looked down at her, and for the first time since he had found her crying, he smiled. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger. "Are you hungry? I have not eaten since breakfast, and that was hardtack and jerky in the saddle." "You just gave me $200 and assaulted a banker," Sarah said, still feeling dazed. "And now you want to have lunch." "Well, I figure we should discuss the terms of our arrangement," Grant said practically. "And I do that better on a full stomach." They found a small restaurant near the edge of town, a place run by a widow named Sister Morrison who served the best chicken and dumplings in southern Utah. Sarah sat across from Grant in a quiet corner, watching him demolish a plate of food while she picked at her own meal. Her mind was racing, trying to understand what had just happened and what it meant. "Why did you do that?" she asked finally. "You do not know me. For all you know, I could be exactly what Mr. Hayes suggested, a woman looking for an easy way out of my troubles." Grant wiped his mouth with his napkin and met her eyes. "I told you already. I know enough about your character from how you refused him." "That is not an answer. Men do not just give away $200 to strangers out of the goodness of their hearts." "Some men do," Grant said. "My mother raised me to believe that when you have the means to help someone, you do it. She would have skinned me alive if I had walked away from a woman in distress." "Your mother sounds like a formidable woman." "She was." Something sad flickered across Grant's face. "She died 4 years ago. Fever took her in the winter. My father followed her 6 months later. Broken heart, my sister says." "I am sorry," Sarah said softly. "I lost my mother when I was 14, and my father last year." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, two orphaned souls recognizing the particular loneliness in each other. Then Grant pushed his empty plate aside and pulled out a small notebook and pencil. "All right, let us talk business. You need to pay me back $200. "What is a realistic time frame for that?" Sarah did her best to calculate. "If I can get my cattle to market this fall, and if the prices hold steady, I could probably manage $50. Then the same next year if I am careful. 4 years, maybe 5. That works for me." Grant wrote something down. "What about interest?" "Interest?" Sarah felt her heart sink. Of course there would be interest. That was how loans worked. "I am thinking no interest," Grant said, looking up at her. "You have enough burden without that. Just pay me back when you can, in whatever amounts make sense." "That is not a standard loan arrangement." "I am not a standard banker, thank God," Grant grinned at her. "Besides, I have a proposition of my own if you are amenable." Sarah tensed. "What kind of proposition?" Grant must have seen her fear because he held up his hands quickly. "Nothing improper, I swear. It is just that I am headed back to Colorado, and I do not have a job waiting for me there. I sold my services to the trail boss for that cattle drive, but that is finished now. I was wondering if you might need a hired hand for a season or 2. "A hired hand," Sarah repeated slowly. "You said yourself the ranch is hard to manage alone. I know cattle, I know horses, and I am a fair hand at fixing things. You could take my wages out of what you owe me. It would give you help you need and reduce your debt at the same time." It made a strange kind of sense, but Sarah hesitated. "People will talk. A single woman with a single man living on her property. Not if we make it clear it is a business arrangement. I can bunk in the barn or the bunkhouse if you have one. Keep everything proper and above board." Grant leaned forward. "Look, I know this is unusual, but you need help, and I need work and a place to stay while you get that ranch back on its feet. We can help each other." Sarah studied him, trying to find the catch, the hidden motive. But his green eyes were clear and honest, and everything about him seemed straightforward. Still, she had learned the hard way that trusting the wrong person could lead to disaster. "Why would you want to stay in Parowan?" she asked. "You said you were headed home to Colorado." Grant was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "Honestly, I have been saving for years to buy land, but every time I get close, something happens. My sister needed money for her husband's medical bills. My father's funeral had to be paid for. There is always something. At a certain point, I realized I was chasing a dream that kept moving further away." He looked up at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression. "Maybe I am tired of wandering. Maybe I want to put down roots somewhere, even if it is just for a season. Maybe I want to do something that matters more than just another cattle drive." Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of the loneliness she heard beneath his words. "The ranch is 3 miles outside of town," she said slowly. "The house is small, but the bunkhouse is sound. I can offer room and board and $20 a month, taken off what I owe you." Grant's face lit up. "You mean it." "I mean it, but there are rules. You work for me and you follow my direction when it comes to the ranch, and everything stays proper. If I hear any gossip starting, you will need to leave." "Agreed." Grant stuck out his hand and Sarah shook it. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but careful. Something about the simple contact made her pulse jump in a way that had nothing to do with business arrangements. They finished their meal and collected Grant's horse from the livery. He was riding a sturdy buckskin gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm disposition. Sarah's own horse, a mare named Molly, was tied outside the mercantile where she had left her that morning a lifetime ago. The ride out to the Abbott ranch took them through red rock country that glowed in the late afternoon sun. The landscape was harsh and beautiful, dotted with scrub brush and juniper trees. Grant followed Sarah along a dusty track that wound between low hills until they crested a rise, and he got his first look at what would be his home for the foreseeable future. The ranch house was a simple wooden structure with a covered porch and a stone chimney. It needed paint and some of the shutters hung crooked, but the bones were good. The barn was larger than Grant had expected, solid and well built, with a corral attached. There was a bunkhouse off to one side, a small structure that looked like it could sleep 4 men comfortably. Everything showed signs of neglect, the kind that came from one person trying to do the work of 3, but nothing looked beyond repair. "It is not much," Sarah said, a defensive note in her voice. "It is fine," Grant said honestly. "I have seen worse and I have stayed in plenty worse. The bones are good, it just needs some attention." They stabled the horses together, and Grant noted with approval that Sarah knew her way around a barn. She might be struggling to keep the ranch going, but she was not afraid of hard work. As the sun began to set, painting the red rocks in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah showed him to the bunkhouse. "There are blankets in the chest, and the pump works if you need water. I will make supper and bring some out to you." "You do not have to do that," Grant said. "I can cook for myself." "I know I do not have to, but it is my ranch and you are my employee and I will see you fed properly." Sarah's chin came up, that stubborn pride showing again. "Besides, I already have stew on the stove. It is no trouble to bring you a bowl," Grant smiled. "Yes, madam, I would appreciate that." He watched her walk back to the house, her slim figure silhouetted against the dying light, and wondered what exactly he had gotten himself into. He had given away most of his savings to a woman he just met, and committed himself to working on a struggling ranch in the middle of nowhere. By any logical measure, it was the most foolish thing he had ever done. But as he dropped his saddlebags on one of the bunks and looked around the simple space that would be his home, Grant felt something he had not experienced in a long time, a sense of purpose. For years he had been drifting, working cattle drives and taking odd jobs, always moving toward a goal that never seemed to materialize. Now, suddenly, he had a reason to stay in one place. He had something to build, even if it was not his own land. And if he was being honest with himself, there was something about Sarah Abbott that had taken root in his mind the moment he saw her crying behind that livery stable. Something about her desperate pride and her refusal to compromise her integrity, even when it would have been easier. She had fire in her and strength, and a beauty that had nothing to do with the delicate features of her face and everything to do with the steel in her spine. Grant shook his head at his own foolishness. He was here to work, nothing more. Sarah Abbott had made it clear that this was a business arrangement, and he would respect that. He had caused her enough disruption for one day without adding romantic complications to the mix. Sarah brought him stew and fresh bread as promised, along with a slice of apple pie that tasted like heaven after months of trail food. They sat on the bunkhouse steps in the gathering darkness and talked about what needed to be done around the ranch. Sarah had 10 head of cattle, though she should have had 30. She had lost some to illness, some to predators, and had been forced to sell others to pay for basic supplies. The plan was to breed what she had and slowly build the herd back up, but it was slow going alone. "I can handle it," Grant assured her. "I have worked ranches from Texas to Montana. 10 head is nothing. We can get them fattened up and healthy, maybe even get you to 15 or 20 by spring if we play it right." "We?" Sarah asked softly. "We," Grant confirmed. "You hired me, remember? That makes your problems my problems, at least for the next season." After Sarah went back to the house, Grant lay on his bunk and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of his new home. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The wind whispered through the eaves of the bunkhouse. And from the main house, he could just barely see the glow of lamplight in what must be Sarah's bedroom window. He fell asleep thinking about honest brown eyes, and a voice that shook with anger rather than fear when faced with a man who tried to own her. The next morning, Grant was up before dawn, a habit ingrained from years of ranch work. He found the pump and washed, then made his way to the barn to check on the animals. He was mucking out stalls when Sarah appeared, dressed in a simple work dress with her hair in a practical braid down her back. "You should have come to the house for breakfast," she said. "Did not want to presume," Grant replied, leaning on his pitchfork. "Besides, this needed doing." "Well, come on then. The eggs are getting cold." They fell into a routine over the following days. Grant worked from sunup to sundown, tackling the dozens of small repairs and improvements the ranch needed. He fixed the crooked shutters and mended fences. He rode out with Sarah to check on the cattle and helped her move them to better grazing. He proved himself knowledgeable about animal husbandry and willing to tackle any job, no matter how dirty or difficult. Sarah found herself watching him more than she should. There was something compelling about the way Grant moved, the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. He was patient with the animals and thoughtful in his approach to problems. When something did not work the first time, he would study it from different angles until he found a solution, and he was kind. That was what surprised her most. He did not treat her like a helpless female who needed constant guidance, but he also did not expect her to carry burdens too heavy for one person. He asked her opinion on decisions about the ranch and listened when she spoke. He treated her as a partner, even though she was technically his employer. 3 weeks after Grant arrived, Sarah woke to the sound of hammering. She pulled on her robe and went to the window, then smiled despite herself. Grant was on the roof of the house, replacing shingles that had been damaged in a storm 2 months prior. She had been meaning to fix them but had not found the time or the courage to climb up there herself. She dressed quickly and made coffee, then carried a cup out to him. "You did not need to do that," she called up. Grant looked down, and even from this distance she could see his grin. "Need and should are different things. This needed doing, so I am doing it. At least come down and eat something first. You will fall off that roof if you get light-headed." Grant climbed down the ladder, and Sarah tried not to notice the way his shirt clung to his shoulders or how the morning sun caught in his hair. She was not supposed to be noticing things like that. He was her employee, nothing more. But as they sat on the porch steps, drinking coffee and watching the sun clear the eastern hills, Sarah could not deny the warmth that spread through her chest. For the first time since her father died, she did not feel alone. Grant's presence had brought something back to the ranch that had been missing, a sense of life, of possibility. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "not just for the roof, for everything." Grant looked at her, his green eyes serious. "You do not need to thank me, I am just doing my job." "It is more than that, and you know it. You gave me back my future when you paid that debt. I do not think I can ever truly repay you." "You do not owe me anything beyond our agreement," Grant said quietly. "I did what anyone decent would have done." "That is not true. Most men would have walked past me crying behind that stable. Most men would have told me to solve my own problems." Sarah set down her coffee cup. "Why did you really help me, Grant?" He was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah thought he might not answer. Then he said, "My sister got into trouble once. She fell in love with a man who turned out to be a cheat and a liar. He got her to invest her inheritance in some scheme that never existed, then disappeared with the money. She was devastated, broke, and too ashamed to ask for help. What happened? She got desperate enough to consider a marriage proposal from a man she did not love, just to have security. I found out just in time and gave her the money to get back on her feet instead." Grant's jaw tightened. "I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone in a similar situation, I would do it. I never wanted to see that kind of desperation again." "Is she all right now?" "Your sister. She is married to a good man, a farmer in Colorado. They have 3 children and a happy life. She writes me every month." Grant smiled softly. "When I saw you behind that stable, you reminded me of her. That same look of someone backed into a corner with no way out. I could not walk away." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "You are a good man, Grant Xavier." "I am just a cowboy who punches bankers," he said lightly, trying to dispel the heavy emotion. "Nothing special about that." "I disagree," Sarah said. "I think you are very special indeed." Their eyes met and held, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with employer and employee. Grant looked away first, clearing his throat. "I should get back to that roof." "Yes," Sarah agreed, though neither of them moved. "And I should start the laundry." They sat there for another moment, shoulders almost touching, before Grant forced himself to stand and climb back up his ladder. But as he worked, he could feel Sarah's eyes on him, and the knowledge made his heart beat faster in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. The summer days passed in a blur of hard work and growing companionship. Grant proved himself invaluable, not just with the physical labor but with his knowledge of ranching. He taught Sarah tricks for managing cattle that her father had never known. He showed her how to read the weather in the shape of the clouds and the behavior of the animals. He helped her understand the business side of ranching in a way that made sense. And slowly, despite her best intentions, Sarah fell in love with him. It happened in small moments. The way he always made sure she had eaten before he took his own meals. How he would leave wildflowers on the porch steps, claiming he had just picked them while riding and did not want them to go to waste. The sound of his voice singing old trail songs while he worked, the melody carrying across the ranch and making her smile. Grant was falling just as hard, though he tried to tell himself it was wrong. Sarah was his employer, and more than that, she was a woman who had been through enough without him complicating her life with unwanted advances. But he could not help noticing the way her face lit up when she laughed, or how capable her hands were as she worked beside him, or the fierce intelligence in her eyes when they discussed the ranch. One evening in late August, a storm rolled in from the west, bringing with it sheets of rain and lightning that cracked across the sky like God's own fury. Grant helped Sarah secure the animals, then made a run for the bunkhouse as the rain turned torrential. He had just stripped off his soaked shirt when there was a knock on the door. He opened it to find Sarah standing there, equally drenched, her hair plastered to her face and her dress clinging to her figure. "The house," she gasped. "The chimney is leaking. The whole main room is flooding." Grant did not hesitate. He grabbed his shirt and followed her through the storm to the house. Water was indeed pouring through the ceiling around the chimney, pooling on the floor and spreading across the wooden planks. Grant quickly assessed the situation. "We need to get up on the roof and cover the chimney," he said. "Do you have any canvas?" Together they found an old tarp and fought their way onto the roof through the driving rain. It was dangerous work, the shingles slick beneath their feet and the wind trying to tear them off their perch. But Grant managed to secure the canvas over the damaged chimney while Sarah held the ladder steady, and eventually the flood inside slowed to a trickle. They stumbled back inside, both of them soaked through and shaking with cold despite the summer warmth. Sarah grabbed towels from her linen chest and thrust one at Grant, then began mopping up the water on the floor. "Leave it," Grant said. "You are frozen. Get into dry clothes before you catch your death." "I can manage," Sarah insisted, but her teeth were chattering. Grant gently took the towel from her hands. "I know you can manage. You have been managing alone for a year, but you do not have to anymore. Now go change before you make yourself sick." Sarah wanted to argue, but the look in Grant's eyes stopped her. There was such tenderness there, such care, that it made her throat tighten with emotion. She nodded and went to her bedroom, closing the door behind her. When she emerged in dry clothes, she found that Grant had mopped up most of the water and was using her stove to heat water for tea. His own shirt was still damp, clinging to his broad shoulders, and his hair stood up in all directions where he had toweled it dry. "You should go back to the bunkhouse and change," Sarah said. "You will get sick too. In a minute. First, you are going to drink this tea and warm up." Grant handed her a steaming cup, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The contact sent a shock through Sarah that had nothing to do with the cold. They stood in her small kitchen, the storm still raging outside, and something shifted between them. Grant set down his own cup and reached up to brush a damp strand of hair from Sarah's face. His hand lingered on her cheek, and she leaned into the touch without thinking. "Sarah," he said softly, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "Yes," she whispered. "I should go." But he did not move. Instead, he stepped closer, until she could feel the heat radiating from his body and smell the rain-fresh scent of his skin. "You should," Sarah agreed, but she tilted her face up toward his. Grant's resolve, already strained to the breaking point by weeks of proximity and denied attraction, finally snapped. He cupped her face in both hands and kissed her, pouring months of loneliness and weeks of building desire into the contact. Sarah made a small sound against his mouth and kissed him back, her hands fisting in his damp shirt and pulling him closer. It was Grant who finally pulled away, resting his forehead against hers as they both struggled to breathe. "I should not have done that," he said raggedly. "I am sorry." "I am not," Sarah said, surprising them both. "Grant, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I think I am falling in love with you." The words tumbled out in a rush, and Sarah felt simultaneously terrified and liberated by speaking them. I know that is probably not what you want to hear. I know this is just a job for you, and I am your employer, and everything about this is complicated. But I cannot keep pretending I do not feel this way. Grant's heart soared even as his mind raced with all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Sarah, you do not know what you are saying. You are grateful, that is all. I helped you when you needed it, and you are confusing gratitude with something else. Do not tell me what I feel, Sarah said, her eyes flashing. I am a grown woman, Grant. I know the difference between gratitude and love. I know my own heart. I work for you, Grant protested weakly. Then stop working for me. Be my partner instead. Stay here not because I pay you, but because you want to. Sarah stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. Or leave if that is what you need to do, but do not tell me that what I feel is not real. Grant ran a hand through his hair, his mind whirling. You want to know the truth? I have been falling for you since the day I met you. Every morning I wake up thinking about you. Every night I fall asleep remembering the way you laugh. You are the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever met, and the thought of leaving this ranch makes me feel like someone is ripping out my heart. Then, why are you fighting this? Sarah asked. Because I have nothing to offer you. Grant's voice rose with frustration. I am a cowboy who lives out of saddlebags. I gave you most of my savings, so I am practically penniless. You deserve someone established, someone who can give you security and a future, not some drifter who punches bankers. I do not want someone established, Sarah said fiercely. I want someone who sees me as an equal. I want someone who makes me laugh and challenges me and does not try to control me. I want someone who would give a stranger his last dollar because it is the right thing to do. I want you, Grant Xavier, exactly as you are. Grant stared at her, and Sarah watched the war playing out across his face. Then, with a sound that was half laugh and half groan, he closed the distance between them and kissed her again, harder this time, more certain. God help me, he muttered against her lips. I want you too. I have wanted you from the moment I saw you, and it has been driving me crazy trying to be professional and proper. Then stop being professional, Sarah said breathlessly. Stop being proper, just be with me. They stood wrapped in each other's arms as the storm raged outside, kissing until their lips were swollen and their hearts were racing. When they finally pulled apart, Grant rested his forehead against hers again and smiled. We are going to scandalize the whole town, you know. A single woman and a single man living together. Let them talk, Sarah said. I spent a year caring what people thought, trying to be respectable and proper, and it nearly destroyed me. I am done living my life according to other people's rules. What if I want to make it respectable? Grant asked softly. What if I want to marry you, Sarah Abbott? Sarah's breath caught. Are you proposing? Not yet. Not until I have a ring and can do it properly, but I am telling you my intentions. I want to build a life with you on this ranch together. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to make this place thrive and fill it with children and grow old watching the sunset from that porch. Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks, but she was smiling. Those sound like very fine intentions. So you are agreeable, Grant grinned, hope and joy lighting up his face. I am very agreeable, but I have conditions. Name them. First, we do this as partners in every sense. The ranch is ours, not mine. The decisions are ours, not mine alone. Agreed, what else? Second, we get married as soon as possible. I do not care about a big ceremony or a fancy dress. I just want to be your wife. Grant kissed her again, thoroughly. I think I can manage that. Anything else? Third, you have to promise to never stop punching people who deserve it. Grant laughed, the sound rich and free. I promise. though I hope Vernon Hayes is the last banker I have to hit for a while. They talked late into the night, making plans and sharing dreams. Grant told Sarah about his childhood in Colorado, about learning to ride before he could walk and helping his father work their small homestead. Sarah told him about her mother's death and how her father had never quite recovered from the loss. They talked about the ranch and what they could build together, about hopes for the future and fears they had both been carrying. As the storm finally began to clear and the first stars appeared through breaks in the clouds, Grant reluctantly stood to leave. "I should go to the bunkhouse." "For propriety's sake." "Propriety can wait until morning," Sarah said, taking his hand. "Stay with me tonight, just to sleep. I do not want to be alone." Grant hesitated, but the earnest plea in her eyes convinced him. They lay together on Sarah's narrow bed, fully clothed, with Grant's arms wrapped around her and Sarah's head resting on his chest. They talked in whispers until exhaustion finally claimed them both. When Sarah woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the solid warmth of Grant beside her, she felt a peace she had not known in years. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. Grant woke a few minutes later and smiled down at her. "Good morning, beautiful." "Good morning, fiancé," Sarah replied, testing out the word. "I like the sound of that." Grant kissed her softly. "But we need to make it official. I am going into town today to see about a ring." "You do not have to do that. You need to save your money." "I have enough for a ring," Grant said firmly. "Besides, I want everyone in Parowan to know you are spoken for, especially a certain banker." Sarah laughed. "You are incorrigible. You love me anyway." "I do. God help me, I really do." Grant rode into Parowan late that morning, his heart lighter than it had been in years. He went straight to the mercantile, where Mr. Johnson kept a small selection of jewelry behind the counter. The proprietor was happy to show Grant his stock, and after careful consideration, Grant chose a simple gold band with a small garnet set in the center. "That is a fine choice," Mr. Johnson said approvingly. "The garnet matches Miss Abbott's eyes. You know it is for her." Grant asked in surprise, "Son, the whole town has been watching you two dance around each other for weeks. About time you made an honest woman of her." The old man winked. "Though between you and me, half the women in town have been swooning over the romance of it. Stranger rides in and saves the damsel from the villain. It is like something out of a dime novel." Grant felt his ears heat. "Is that what people are saying?" "That is the charitable version. There are also folks saying less pleasant things, but you do not need to worry about them." Mr. Johnson wrapped the ring carefully. "Miss Sarah is a good woman and you seem like a decent man. That is all that matters." Before leaving town, Grant stopped at the church to speak with the pastor, a thin man with kind eyes named Reverend Thomas. "I would like to arrange a wedding," Grant said without preamble, "as soon as possible, for myself and Sarah Abbott." Reverend Thomas smiled. "I have been expecting this conversation. How does Sunday sound? I can publish the banns after services this week." "Sunday is perfect, thank you, Reverend." As Grant rode back to the ranch, he passed the bank and saw Vernon Hayes standing in the window. The banker's jaw was still bruised from where Grant had hit him, and his eyes followed Grant with undisguised hatred. Grant simply tipped his hat in mocking courtesy and rode on. Sarah was waiting on the porch when he returned, and the smile on her face told Grant she knew where he had been. He dismounted and walked up the steps, then dropped to one knee in front of her. "Sarah Abbott, you are the most remarkable woman I have ever known. You are strong and brave and stubborn as a mule, and I love everything about you. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" He opened the box to show her the ring, and Sarah gasped at its simple beauty. "It is perfect," she breathed. "Is that a yes?" "That is a yes. 1,000 times yes." Grant slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed with pure joy. When he finally set her down, they kissed until they were both breathless. "The wedding is Sunday," Grant said. "I hope that is all right. I wanted to marry you today, but the Reverend needs a few days. Sunday is perfect. We need to tell people, make some kind of plan. We can ride into town tomorrow and spread the word, but today I just want to spend with you." They spent the afternoon working side by side on the ranch, but everything felt different now. Every shared glance held promise. Every accidental touch sent sparks through them both. They were building something together, not just a ranch but a life, and the knowledge made even mundane tasks feel magical. That evening they sat on the porch steps and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Grant had his arm around Sarah's shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth, feeling more content than she had ever been. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong," Sarah admitted softly. "This all feels too good to be real." "It is real," Grant assured her, "and nothing is going to go wrong. We will face whatever comes together. Promise." "I promise." The week leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparations. Sarah bought fabric in town and spent her evenings sewing a simple white dress with the help of several neighboring women who had warmed to the romance of the situation. Grant cleaned up the ranch house until it gleamed and fixed every last squeaky board and loose nail. They spent their evenings on the porch, making plans and dreaming about the future. On Thursday afternoon, Grant was replacing a section of fence when he heard the sound of approaching horses. He looked up to see a group of 4 men riding toward him, and his hand instinctively moved to the gun at his hip. Something about the purposeful way they were approaching set his instincts on edge. The lead rider was a large man with a cruel face and a deputy's star on his vest. Grant recognized him from town, a man named Dutch Miller who had a reputation for settling disputes with his fists. The other 3 men were ranch hands by the look of them, rough characters who seemed more suited to causing trouble than preventing it. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Grant asked, keeping his tone polite but wary. "You Grant Xavier?" Dutch asked. "I am. What is this about?" "We are here on behalf of Vernon Hayes. He says you assaulted him in his place of business and he wants restitution." Grant's jaw tightened. Hayes had it coming, and everyone in town knows why. If he wants to press charges, tell him to do it properly through the sheriff, not send his hired thugs. Dutch smiled, but there was no humor in it. "See, Mr. Hayes does not want this going through official channels. Bad for business, people knowing he was trying to extort favors from a lady. So he hired us to deliver a message more directly." The 4 men dismounted, and Grant assessed his options quickly. He could probably take 1 or 2 of them in a fair fight, but 4 against 1 with at least 2 of them armed was suicide. He needed to buy time. "Whatever Hayes is paying you, it is not worth it," Grant said. "I am marrying Miss Abbott on Sunday. If you hurt me, you will have to answer to her, and I promise you she is meaner than she looks." "We ain't here to hurt you permanent," Dutch said, cracking his knuckles. "Just teach you some manners about respecting your betters." They advanced on him, and Grant backed up against the fence, his mind racing. Then a voice rang out across the yard, clear and cold. "That is far enough." All 5 men turned to see Sarah standing on the porch of the house, holding a rifle that looked too big for her small frame but which she clearly knew how to use. The barrel was pointed steadily at Dutch's chest. "This is between him and us, madam," Dutch said, trying to sound reasonable. "You do not want to get involved. I am already involved. This is my ranch, and that is my future husband you are threatening. I suggest you mount up and ride back to Vernon Hayes with a message of your own." Sarah's voice did not waver. Tell him if he ever sets foot on my property again, if he ever sends men to threaten what is mine again, I will shoot him myself and claim it was self-defense. Given what he tried to do to me, I think the law would be on my side." "You are making a big mistake," Dutch warned. "The only mistake here is yours." Sarah cocked the rifle with an ominous click. "Now get off my land." The four men looked at each other, clearly not having expected armed resistance from a woman. After a tense moment, Dutch held up his hands. "All right, we are going. But Hayes is not going to like this." "I do not care what Hayes likes. Go." They mounted their horses and rode off, but not before Dutch called back, "This is not over." As soon as they were out of sight, Sarah lowered the rifle, and Grant saw that her hands were shaking. He ran to her and pulled her into his arms, taking the gun and setting it carefully aside. "Are you all right?" he asked urgently. "I am fine. But I have never been so scared in my life. What if they had called my bluff?" "Bluff? You mean you would not have shot them?" "I would have shot them," Sarah said firmly. "That rifle has bullets in it and I know how to use it, but I was terrified I would have to." Grant held her tighter, his heart still racing. "You are the bravest woman I have ever met, you know that." "I was protecting what is mine," Sarah said simply. "You would have done the same for me, in a heartbeat, but we need to be careful. Hayes is not going to let this go." They spent the rest of the afternoon securing the ranch, making sure all the animals were accounted for and that nothing could be easily sabotaged. That night, Grant insisted on sleeping in the house rather than the bunkhouse, and Sarah did not argue. They sat up late, watching the darkness beyond the windows and talking in low voices about what to do. "Maybe we should go to the sheriff," Sarah suggested. "And tell him what? That the deputy threatened me but did not actually do anything. Hayes has half the law in this county in his pocket." Grant shook his head. "No, we need to handle this differently." "How?" "By getting married on Sunday as planned and showing Hayes that we are not intimidated. By living our lives and building this ranch into something successful. The best revenge is living well." Sarah smiled despite her fear. "When did you become so philosophical?" "Must be your influence. You bring out the best in me." Sunday dawned clear and bright, with a cool breeze that promised a relief from the summer heat. Sarah woke before dawn, too excited and nervous to sleep. She bathed and washed her hair, then carefully put on the white dress she had sewn. It was simple but flattering, with a fitted bodice and flowing skirt that made her feel beautiful. Grant had spent the night in the bunkhouse to maintain propriety for these last few hours. He wore his best shirt and pants, and he had even managed to get a shave and a haircut in town the day before. When he saw Sarah walking toward him in front of the church, his breath caught. She was radiant, her dark hair loose around her shoulders and her face glowing with happiness. The ceremony was small but heartfelt. Reverend Thomas spoke about partnership and commitment, about building a life together based on mutual respect and love. Grant and Sarah exchanged their vows in steady voices, their eyes locked on each other as they promised to love and cherish for all their days. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Grant kissed Sarah with such tenderness that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors, hand in hand, Sarah felt tears of joy streaming down her face. There was a small reception at the church, with cake and lemonade provided by the church ladies. People came up to congratulate them, most sincerely, though Sarah noticed that Vernon Hayes was conspicuously absent. She also noticed that several of the wealthier townspeople stayed away, clearly disapproving of her marrying a penniless cowboy. But Sarah did not care. She had everything she needed in the man standing beside her, in the ring on her finger, in the life they were building together. They rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon, with Grant driving a wagon they had borrowed to transport wedding gifts from generous neighbors. Sarah sat beside her husband. She tested the word in her mind and found it perfect, and watched the familiar landscape pass by with new eyes. Everything looked different now, brighter somehow, full of possibility. That night, they consummated their marriage in Sarah's bed, now their bed, with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless. Grant was gentle and patient, treating Sarah like she was precious, and she responded with a fierce desire that surprised them both. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, talking and laughing and making plans. "I love you, Mrs. Xavier," Grant murmured against her hair. "I love you too, Mr. Xavier, though I think I might keep Abbott for the ranch. The Abbott ranch has a history, and I do not want to lose that. The Abbott ranch it is. We can add Xavier in smaller letters below it." Grant kissed her temple. "We are going to make this place thrive, Sarah. I promise you that. I know we will. We can do anything together." The next months proved the truth of those words. With Grant as a full partner, the ranch began to transform. They worked from dawn to dusk, repairing buildings and tending cattle and slowly expanding their operation. Grant used his contacts from years of cattle driving to get good prices on breeding stock, and by winter, they had increased their herd to 25 head. Vernon Hayes made one more attempt to cause trouble, spreading rumors in town about Sarah's morality and Grant's violence. But the story of how Grant had defended Sarah's honor had already taken root in the community's imagination, and Hayes found few sympathetic ears. Eventually, the banker gave up, focusing his malice elsewhere. The first winter of their marriage was hard, with snow that came early and stayed late. But Grant and Sarah weathered it together, spending long evenings by the fire making plans for spring. Sarah taught Grant to read better, something he had never had much opportunity to learn on the trail. Grant taught Sarah songs from his cowboy days, filling the house with music. In March, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. Grant was beside himself with joy, hovering over her and insisting she rest more, eat more, take better care of herself. Sarah tolerated his fussing with amused patience, knowing it came from love. Their son was born in November, arriving during a rare, warm spell that felt like a blessing. They named him Thomas Grant Xavier, after the reverend who had married them and his father. He had Grant's green eyes and Sarah's dark hair, and from the moment he drew his first breath, he had both his parents wrapped around his tiny fingers. Grant took to fatherhood with the same wholehearted commitment he brought to everything. He would walk the floor with Thomas for hours when the baby fussed, singing trail songs in his rough voice until the infant fell asleep. He built a cradle with his own hands, sanding it until it was smooth as silk, so nothing would scratch his son's delicate skin. Sarah watched her husband with their child and fell in love with him all over again. She had known Grant was a good man, but seeing him as a father revealed depths of gentleness and patience she had not imagined. The ranch continued to prosper. By their second anniversary, they had 50 head of cattle and had begun raising horses as well. Grant's reputation as an honest dealer and skilled rancher spread throughout the territory, and they had more business than they could handle. They hired 2 men to help with the work, good men who lived in the bunkhouse and worked hard. Vernon Hayes eventually left Parowan after a scandal involving embezzlement came to light. Grant and Sarah heard he had fled to California, and neither of them mourned his departure. The new banker was a fair-minded man who treated Sarah with respect and gave them reasonable terms when they needed to expand their operation. 3 years after their wedding, Sarah gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Matthew and Grace. The ranch house had to be expanded to accommodate their growing family, and Grant built an addition with the help of their hired men, and several neighbors who pitched in for the barn, raising turned house raising. On their 5th anniversary, Grant and Sarah stood on their porch and watched the sun set over land that was truly theirs. The mortgage was paid off, the ranch was thriving, and their 3 children were playing in the yard under the watchful eye of their oldest, Thomas, who at 5 already showed signs of his father's sense of responsibility. "You remember the day we met?" Sarah asked, leaning into Grant's embrace. "How could I forget? You were crying behind a livery stable and I was fool enough to get involved." "Best decision you ever made," Sarah teased. "Second best," Grant corrected. "The best decision was punching Vernon Hayes. That felt really good." Sarah laughed, the sound rich and free. "You are terrible. You love me anyway." "I do. I really, really do." Sarah turned in his arms to face him. "Thank you, Grant, for everything. For saving me, for loving me, for building this life with me." Grant cupped her face in his hands, his touch still tender after 5 years of marriage. "You saved me too, you know. I was drifting before I met you, just another cowboy going nowhere. You gave me a home, a purpose, a family. You gave me everything that matters." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the Utah sky in shades of crimson and gold. Behind them, their children's laughter rang out, and the ranch they had built together stood solid and prosperous. The journey that had begun with a debt and a desperate proposition had led them here, to a love that was stronger than any challenge, to a life richer than they had ever imagined possible. And as Grant swept Sarah up in his arms and carried her into their house while she laughed and protested, both of them knew with absolute certainty that they would face whatever the future held together, hand in hand, heart to heart, for all the years to come.